If you're like me and actually like the Epic Game Store because they give you free games every week, you'll check in and see which free games they're offering. One week I checked in and saw that God's Trigger was free to play, and it looked like Hotline Miami meets Quentin Tarantino, which I liked, so I decided to see if God's Trigger was any good and could live up to the precedent set by Hotline Miami 1 and 2. Even though this game does have co-op, which sounds super fun and something that Hotline Miami doesn't have, no one wants to play with me, so I just checked out the single player campaign. So with all that out of the way, is this game the new Hotline Miami or just a complete failure that literally no one will ever play, since apparently there's no middle ground on YouTube? I do have to say that I really like this game's art style with its cel-shaded look centered around mythology. The story is presented with pictures and narration from the protagonists Judy and Harry, as well as with in-game cutscenes. The story was pretty decent for a top-down shooter, but I wasn't super invested and kept playing primarily for the gameplay. If anything, the story was just there as a little reward before and after every level and helped shape the aesthetic of the game that it was going for. This game's mechanics is super deep, and I was introduced to more mechanics in the tutorial level than the whole time I played in Hotline Miami, which was pretty overwhelming at first. The key mechanics that separate this game from other top-down shooters in its genre is that there's character swapping between the two main protagonists and the different abilities each character has that are upgraded through the skill tree. The two protagonists you play as is Harry, who is a soldier from heaven who lost his wings, and he's a melee-focused character centered around speed as you upgrade him later on, while Judy escaped from hell and is a more range-based character. However, both can pick up weapons and use them the same. Their goal at the beginning of the game is to take down the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The story starts at the prologue in the first level, and then it flashes back to tell their story from the start. Each chapter of the game has a different environment, which provides some nice variation since each environment has a different style of level design and theme. For example, the western levels had buildings with a lot of different rooms inside them, whereas the medieval-looking levels had lots of switches and narrow hallways with tiny rooms, and the factory levels were centered around explosions. As well as level design, each area also has unique mechanics to that area, with my favorite one being towards the end of the game where time would slow down in specific spots. It really helped keep each area feeling distinct, apart from just the amazing visual changes. The enemy variety was very good too, with each area having enemies specific to that area that really made you change up how you approached that room. There was also one in the catacomb levels who could revive their fallen teammates with their witch powers, so you had to prioritize them first so they couldn't revive their teammates as you were killing everyone. There's a lot to think about and keep track of between character swapping, special abilities, dodging, which attack to use, which character to use, keeping track of your energy bar, all while trying to kill enemies and not die in a room. There's also an upgrade screen at the end of each level where you can upgrade the character's various abilities and give them perks. As you level up, you unlock more abilities that you can switch between during combat, which means there's even more things to keep track of, so I never really did that. It also took me a while to get used to the controls since there's so much to keep track of and the game introduces you to all its mechanics right in the first level. A lot of the upgrades didn't feel like they had a noticeable change, but whenever I unlocked a new special ability, I'd have to think about when to use it, even though it was pretty situational most of the time. The best upgrade was when I got to upgrade my basic attack so that Judy's chain could kill 2 enemies with 1 shot. I think I liked that upgrade a lot because it just sort of happened and it still made me feel powerful without overwhelming me with new mechanics or abilities I had to think about. That's not to say I don't like deeper complex games, it's just that when your game is centered around snap decision making and fast-paced reactions, it's hard to do that while keeping track of all the abilities you can use and when to use them. I think that's also why I like the perks system, which are passive buffs that are found in treasure chests hidden in the levels. At the end of each level, the game gives you a score based on how good you did in that level, so your goal is to try to get the S rank, which you get from stringing together combos or performing stealth kills, but I've never really been into those type of systems, but it's cool that it's there for people who like that sort of thing. Even if going for S rankings on every level isn't your thing, stringing together combos is still super satisfying thanks to the fast-paced gameplay loop as well as all the unique weapons. Each weapon felt unique and each area had unique weapons to that area, which helped keep gameplay varied along with the enemy design. As I kept playing levels and progressing through the game, I realized that I liked Judy's moveset way better than Harry's because of her long-ranged attack that she has at all times, so I started leveling her as my main character. This definitely isn't what the developers wanted players to do, but it's pretty disappointing because I wish there was actually a reason to play as both characters, since that is one of the main mechanics that separates this game from other games in its genre. Most people will just prefer the playstyle of one character over another, so there's nothing to lose by just playing as the one character. There were a few levels that force you into playing as one character, like this one level where Judy was the sniper and Harry's doing the main top-down style of play, which was actually the most fun for me because it utilized the switching character mechanics in a whole new way that was actually useful. But overall, during the regular levels, the game does do things like put character-specific walls that only Harry or Judy can break through, but that's not enough to get me to play as each character the same amount, even though that's what the game was trying to do. I would just go through the wall as Harry, and then immediately switch back to Judy. If anything, I feel like the game encourages playing as one character through its game design, just because leveling one character makes them more powerful than they should be, so it makes the game even easier than if you were to play as both characters equally. There was also just one really shoehorned in stealth section that completely goes against what the rest of the game is going for. It even has everyone's favorite stealth mechanic, instant fail states. The boss fights are framed around each of the horsemen with war, famine, death, and pestilence, and there's also a final boss fight that I don't want to spoil. The boss fights are simple but satisfying in how each one is defeated. I wish they were a bit more challenging, but they use the same generous checkpoint system as the main levels. If they took out the checkpoints during the 4 horsemen fights, it would have been better because then you'd really feel like you knew the boss's patterns and learned the fight. I enjoyed how the theme of the boss fight matched up with each of the 4 horsemen's traits. For example, when you fight Famine, she's really overweight and you have to burn the fat off of her by trapping her in these cages, and then she tries to heal herself by having servants bring her plates of food. Lastly, I barely noticed the music in this game apart from the menus when it sounded like a budget Halo theme song. It just felt like background music just to have background music since it didn't really fit what was happening on screen. I even tried a few levels specifically listening for things I could write about the music, but it really just feels like they made a playlist with generic beats to put in the background. It's not bad, but I feel like the game would have been just as good without any music at all, and probably even better if they just raised up the sound effects volume. The sound effects are really what saves this game in the audio department. It's just much better than the music. The sound of a guy's blood splattering onto the ground after killing him is what Ted Bundy dreams of. The weapons have great sound effects too, like the piercing sound of Judy's chain, and each gun having a nice weighty sounding blast when it's fired. God's Trigger definitely doesn't take the place of Hotline Miami for me, although it does bring some good ideas to the table. If they were to make a Hotline Miami 3, a lot of the mechanics in this game could be reworked to fit into that game, but as it stands, the mechanics in God's Trigger just don't mesh well with the fast-paced nature of the core gameplay loop. It's disappointing because a lot of the ideas in this game do have potential. The upgrade tree, for example, would have been a lot better if they just stuck with the more meaningful changes instead of incremental upgrades that weren't really noticeable. God's Trigger is really polished and moment-to-moment gameplay is fun, but in the end, all the mechanics and systems that are in this game just bog down the core gameplay loop of running and gunning, since I barely ever found myself using special abilities or switching characters that much. It's still a good game, and I know I've been really negative sounding towards it, but it's because a lot of the ideas could be really good if they were implemented differently. I'm so glad I played this game since I did have a good time overall. It's just a shame that there's so much potential that God's Trigger missed. Thanks for watching, and if you liked this video, make sure to like and subscribe so you can see more videos like it in the future.